നമസ്കാരം. ഹരി ഓം. ശ്രീ ഗുരുഭ്യോ നമ. Join ചെയ്തവരെ, if you can mute your phones or mute your Zoom, it will be really good because the background noise will not be there. So I will just start immediately. So the topic today is Hindu temples, the history, the need, the relevance and significance. In the synopsis, I had mentioned a few things, and those 5 points basically emanated from my mind. Because being an engineer, right, I have a rational mind and I always question and I always look for reason and logic behind each and everything we experience in Hinduism or into all the acharams and the anushtanams. So in that manner, when I was looking into it, when I was trying to find answers, there was 5 major points which used to linger in my mind for years. The first one was I always wondered what the history of the Hindu temples were. Then I started to speculate what significance it holds, because you hear a lot of significances from each temple based on their type of devotion. Then I also started to think or ruminate on the fact that why do we need a temple? Is temple a real necessity? Then I started looking into it or starting mulling over the concept that do we really need a temple in the present day of life? Is it really needed in the day-to-day activities? And I heard a few speeches and quotes which clearly said Hindu temples are not places for public worship. Then everything threw me off the balance. Then for the last couple of years, I was looking for answers.
Join the meeting.
And in my quest to find answers, what I did was I started referring countless materials, textbooks, articles, and I also watched numerous podcasts. So what I've tried to do is summarize all my findings, which I have read from books and also which I have read from podcasts. And since there's quite a lot of them, I'm unable to cite and quote each one in this talk because this talk is only for 45 to 50 minutes. And this is a very vast subject and we cannot cover all the aspects in 45 minutes. So as the synopsis said, we will strictly stick with the history, the need, the relevance, the significance of a temple, and that too in a very high level. So a small disclaimer, the thoughts, the views, and the opinions I'm expressing are all mine. So if you find any factual errors or mistakes, please point it out to me. And as I always do, I always welcome constructive criticism and suggestions. So let's get into the topic. And for people who joined in the last couple of minutes, could you please mute your phones or your computers, please, because we can hear some background noise here. So looking at the history of it, most of us will find it extremely hard to believe that the Hindu temple structures, so I'm emphasizing the word structures here, especially the massive megalithic ones, which we see all around us, are rather a recent phenomena in the historical timeline of Sanatana Dharma. So from an Indian subcontinent perspective, the term recent means we have been building temples or the big temple structures only for the past 2,000 years. Only for the past 2,000 years. So Carl Sagan, whom got so popular in 1980s from this TV show Cosmos, the famous American astronomer, the author, once said, Hinduism is the only ancient religious tradition on earth which talks about the right time scale. Europeans stated earth was a few thousand years old and Europeans completely based it on Bible. The Mayans thought it was in terms of millions, whereas in Hindus, they calculated the age of earth to a very precise number, in billions to the second decimal place. So that's how accurate we were. So we all know in North America, especially when you look at the North American recorded history, the history doesn't go that deep, the recorded history, I mean. 50 years gives you an antique status, and 100 years finds you a spot in the annals of historical archival significance. That's nothing. That's nothing when you compare it with an Indian historical timescale. Hinduism is the oldest religion. No one knows when it began. The best guess is it could be as old as 7,000 plus years old. So when we say that we don't have enough proof that large, massive temple structures existed before 2000 years, then there's a huge disconnect. So to understand this disconnect, let us look at the archaeological evidences and the published historical data. So what we are trying to do is we are not relying on any hearsay information or any non-proven, non-scientific research. Instead, we are sticking with the basic archaeological evidences and the published historical data. So when we look from that perspective, the Indus Valley civilization, the cradle of Sanatana Dharma civilization, consisted of Harappa, Mohenjo-daro, and 3 other major sites. This civilization thrived 5,000 years ago. This civilization was noted for their urban planning, brilliant roads, well laid out baked brick residential buildings, dams, elaborate water supply system, and wonderfully designed gravity-driven drainage systems. Even the architects and the city planners today are in awe, looking at how technology was advanced 5,000 years back. So, the historians, the archaeologists, and the academicians found many religious seals that suggested spiritual and mystical thinking in Indus Valley civilization. They found fire altars, religious stones, emblems, and even womb-like artifacts and swastika marks. But surprisingly, they did not find any huge temple structures. So a few hypotheses came up in this research community. Some people said, oh, maybe the temples were plundered and razed to the ground. And some others said, maybe the temples did not survive the natural calamities because the Indian subcontinent was bombarded with floods, frequent floods, earthquakes, wildfire, and tsunami in the south area. And few others said, oh, maybe the structures withered off during the course of time due to degradation, erosion, corrosion, and all the stuff. But none of these above 3 hypotheses were able to convincingly answer all the questions. So the question still remains. Where from the idea of a temple and temple structure come into Bharatvarsha? So to answer this question, what I found based on my research was there were 3 schools of thought. So the first school of thought said, in Vedic period, the cornerstone ritual that was practiced was yajna. This involved creating an altar using bricks, lighting a fire within it, chanting and pouring offerings into the fire. This ritual did not demand a permanent structure. It was a ritual that allowed complete mobility, suggesting and backing up the theory that the early Vedic people were indeed a nomadic people. They kept moving from one place to the other. There is ample proof in our Vedas or even in the Bhagavad Puranam to back this up. These nomadic people, as they say, they reared animals and they were agriculturists. Scarcity of pasture, frequent floods on the river banks, climatic conditions, availability of arable lands, frequent attacks by the invaders, safety of the people, and the domestic animals all dictated their movements. So based on this thought, historians believe that the nomadic Vedic people had mobile temples. They had mobile temples. These temples were mounted on carts, and these mobile temples traveled with these nomadic herders wherever they went. Which is why centuries later, when grand temples of stone were built, they were still referred to as rathas and chariots. Which is why wheels are a key motif on all the temple walls. That is why the chariot ride or Radholtsavam is a key ritual in all the temples. So this is how the first school of thought looked into it. The second school of thought had a different opinion. The second school of thought said that the temples have always existed in India, but in a very small or a medium scale manner. They started citing examples of some Kuladevam temples for a group of families, the Grama Devada temple for a village, the common puja room in a big joint family household, and so on. So they started making a lot of references to our itihasams and Puranas, where various idols were installed at key location. And they were saying that they were all on a very small or a medium scale, and they all became grand structures much later. So there's a school of thought number 3. The school of thought number 3 states that in Vedic times, things tended to be very organic, which means, like the wedding pandals which you see nowadays, things came together during festivals and ceremonies, and they were rapidly dismantled, mirroring Sanatana Dharma's cycle of life: creation, sustenance, and destruction. So temporary shrines using bamboo and grass were built. Idols and murtis were made of clay, which was totally organic and recyclable. After the ritual, the idols and the murtis were thrown into water bodies, and the precinct set aflame, so that there is no trace either of the temple or the deity in it. So we see this practice even today. So during the festivals of Durgashtami or Ramanavami or Ganesh Chaturthi, this is exactly what we do. Maybe this is a remnant of the old habit or tradition we had. So, on my personal thought, I concur with quite a lot of things on school of thought number 1, school of thought number 2, and school of thought number 3. So I basically think it's a mixture of all 3. But whatever be it, there's a common factor in all 3, is that the 3 schools of thought in the Vedic was clearly said that in Vedic people did not need big size temples to anchor their spirituality. Could you please mute your phone, please? Then let's look at the historical evidences and evolution of temples. There are a lot of temples in various degraded and destroyed conditions throughout India. And when the temples are completely degraded or destroyed, it makes it very difficult for someone to analyze it and historically date it. So let us look at the temples which has been scientifically proven based on published archaeological evidences. The one thing which stands apart is the Kirtali temple in Kodungalur, Kerala. This temple was dedicated to Lord Shiva, and it was built by the Chera kings 2000 years back. So this temple was a functioning temple back then, and in the 13th century, the Musiris or the Kodungalur area had a lot of natural calamities. The whole Musiri port just vanished into the deep sea. Then the temple was partially destroyed. They rebuilt the temple. Then came the Portuguese, they attacked the temple. Then came the Dutch, they attacked the temple. And currently this particular temple is a non-functioning temple. And based on historical facts, this is one of the oldest temple structures we find here. It is 2000 years old, a non-functioning temple. Then there was another temple structure which they excavated when they were digging up the desert in Afghanistan, close to like 80 to 90 years back. It was in a place called Surk Kotal. It was not dedicated to any god. They did not find any idols inside this one. And they said, looked at the history of it, and they realized it was 1900 years old. And it was constructed by King Kanishka. So these are the 2 non-functioning temples which we spoke of. Now let's look at the functioning temples, the old temples which are still being used today. So the Mundeshwari temple in Bihar is believed to be the oldest functioning Hindu temple in the world. It's located in Bihar, India, and this is 1600 years old. So the other temple is the Changu Narayan temple, which is believed to be the oldest functioning temple outside India, and this is located in Nepal, and this is approximately 1500 years old. So historians claim that the idea of permanent structures came much later into Hinduism, probably under the Greek influence. So the Greeks came to India during the reign of Alexander the Great in the year 300 before Common Era, that is 300 years before the birth of Christ. They carried with them the ideas from Greece, Egypt, Mesopotamia, and Persia. where they had huge, vast temples and pyramids made up of stone and brick. The earliest stone images of the Indian temples that still survives now clearly show Greek influence. And that's how they started introducing the ideas of pillars and obelisks. So when Hindus started looking into these concepts, the historians say that the Dvajastamba or the flagpole we had in our temples started getting into this kind of a Greek influence, and they started using the freestanding pillars. Prior to that, it was only wood and timber that was used. So that is how slowly the temple architecture started getting influenced by the Greek. Also in olden times in India, the rooms and the buildings, if you look into it, or if you read any old stories, you would realize that there were open doors and windows, allowing a lot of natural light to come in, and air too, to flood all the inner corners of the room. The Greeks introduced the idea of curtain. In Sanskrit, the curtain is called as javanika. It is of Greek origin and comes from the word yavan or Greek. So the curtain they started using curtains in the temples and to cover the deities during rituals and in backdrops. And similarly, when the Lord Buddha, the Gautama Buddha died, his body was cremated. His relics, such as his tooth and his hair, were taken by his followers. So rather than immersing these in rivers, as it was a standard practice back then, they were buried under a huge mound. And on top of the mound, they started to build a small permanent stupas to commemorate those relics. And these stupas, in course of time, started becoming objects of veneration, and they slowly converted these objects of veneration into Buddhist temples. And if you look at this point or this particular idea very closely, you see a lot of examples in Hinduism too. A lot of ancient Shiva temples were built on the samadhi of saints. But when we hear it for the first time, right, it's pretty hard to believe. But when you start doing research, you would realize that there are a couple of temples even in South India and in North India which were built on the samadhi of saints. So the tradition of building these mega-sized temples started on a mega scale from the golden age of Gupta dynasty. It was around the mid-3rd centuries. So it is believed during that time that building a temple would give immense bliss and was considered the best deed a person could ever do. Thus, the king, the saints, the noble people, the religious leaders, and every rich citizen of the community started to build big temples. So when you start to look at the meaning of the word temple in a couple of Indian subcontinent languages, you get to understand a total wider perspective. Look at the word kshetram. Kshetram literally means a place. And even in chapter 13 of Gita, Lord Krishna equates the kshetram as a body too. So that's taking it one step forward. So then we have the word called Devagriham, which we commonly use as a synonym for temple. Devagriham basically means house of God. Then you have Devalayam. Devalayam means a place or the residence of God. Then look at the Sinhalese language. In Sinhalese language, Ambalam means a meeting place. And if you look at the oldest language in the world, Tamil gives you a totally different meaning. There's 2 words in Tamil. The old Sendamil talks about Ambalam. And in Ambalam, what happens is Tirunavukarasu makes quite a lot of references to Ambalam as Thillainathan in Ambalam when he talks about Chidambaram. And there, the contextual meaning is a resting place. Then the other commonly used word in Tamil is Kovil. Ko means king, and il comes from the word illam. So that basically means a residence of the king. So this is how the meaning of the word temple in different South Indian languages looks like. And even for the fun of looking into the word origins or the etymology here, look for the meaning of the word called religion. The religion, madam, literally means abhiprayam. So that is how it looks like. So I was pretty much surprised when I started looking at all the words. Then let's look at what the primary need of a temple is. Our Vedas clearly state and they dictate that one needs to live in harmony with nature and universe, and with a 100% belief that all things are one, everything is interconnected, and it is governed by one single law. So it takes it to one more step further, and it says human beings are the microcosmos of the macrocosmic world. In other words, the laws prevailing in the world around us also operate and influence our bodies. So that is why Shankara Bhagavad beautifully said, Punarapi Jananam, Punarapi Maranam. Hindus believe that life and death are a continuous process. Belief in rebirth, hence infinite lives, which is a hallmark of Hinduism, makes achievements meaningless and puts a focus on compassion, understanding, wisdom, and knowledge. And when we say knowledge here, we talk about Atma-jnanam. So the Vedas talks about the 4 goals or the Purusharthas of human life as natural and proper for us to help to reach the human fulfillment. It says that one needs to have a balanced, meaningful life, satisfying, fruitful life, provided they undergo these 4 Purusharthas. As we all know, it's Dharma, Artha, Kama, and Moksha. So since we all know the meanings, I'm not going to go in depth into it. So Dharma, it brings order and stability. And if you really look into it, without Dharma, Artha and Kama becomes very self-destructive. And the fun part about the Sanskrit is, like the word Dharma, Kama, Swargam, Papam, there is no equivalent meaning for the word Moksham. In Purusharthas, the final stage is to reach Moksham. That is the stage. And when you start looking into English, the word Moksham can be very difficult to define or explain. And there was a very beautiful Malayalam word which I read in a Malayalam book a couple of months back. It said, Mohangal Shaikkimbol Moksham Labhyamagam. So that the English translation of this Malayalam word is, when all our desires cease to exist, we attain moksha. So moksha is the ultimate freedom from bondage. It releases one from the continuous cycle of birth, death, and rebirth, which we called it as samsara. And moksha is not something which we can trade or procure. And moksha is something we all have within us. It is our true nature. It is who we really are. So that is the 4th and the final step of the Purusharthas. And that is why Tattva Bodha clearly says, Praptasya Praptihi. So that basically means rediscovering what we already possess, using self-knowledge and self-discipline, and to get the Atma-jnanam. So, moksha, once you attain, that was one of the primary need of the temple. And they also explain how to attain moksha. It is beautifully said in Amrita Bindu Upanishad, Mana eva manishyanam karanam bandha moksheho. Our mind is nothing but a collection of thought. The mind is a very intangible thing. There's no precise location or precise organ which we can classify or point out as a mind. So mind is nothing but a collection of thoughts. Mind is a cause of bondage. Mind is a cause of liberation. So that's why we say, as you think, so you become. So everything begins within our thought. We sow a thought and we reap an action. If we repeat an action, it becomes a habit. The sum total of our habits defines our character. And our character in turn determines our destiny. This means that everything we are experiencing now in our lives is a result of thoughts that we chose to cultivate. That's such a very profound statement in Hinduism. So, the intention here is to make the mind calm and balanced so that we become easeful, peaceful, skillful, useful, successful, and ultimately fit to realize the supreme truth, the Atma-jnanam or the Brahma Vidya. That is the primary goal of the temple. So that is what, when we had this whole Vedas being classified as 4 different Vedas, Rig Veda, Yajur Veda, Sama Veda, and Atharva Veda, and every Veda had the Upanishads at the very end, and every Upanishad had a very simple sentence, a very powerful sentence for the busy people to understand the concept so that we can realize the essence of the Upanishad or the Veda so that can attain moksha. Those simple sentences are called Mahavakyas. So when you look at Rig Veda, it clearly says Prajnanam Brahma. Yajurveda talks about Aham Brahmasmi. Samaveda talks about Tattvamasi. And Atharva Veda talks about Ayamatma Brahma. So this is how the subtle concept of that we are a part of divine was slowly brought into it, and the concept of moksha, which is a primary need of the temple, was emphasized into the Sanatana Dharma. So what happened back then was it was difficult for a normal person, a normal lay person or an illiterate to realize the supreme principle. It was totally beyond his comprehension. It was very difficult for him to understand. So what happened was certain locations were picked to infuse this subtle knowledge using simple examples, using much more understandable symbolisms, using scenery, metaphors, icons, images, sculptures, which the normal day-to-day man could relate to. So they were constantly reminded that they have to progress towards a path of moksha and not to get bogged down by work, obstacles, or the simple pleasures they enjoy in their day-to-day life. And that is how the concept of Tirtha and Kshetra came into picture. Tirtha is a place of pilgrimage, typically located on the bank of the river, seashore, lake, or any source of perennial water. The meaning of Tirtha in English means passage. Water, the purifying, nourishing element, the life giver of our blue planet Earth, was given complete prominence in Hinduism. Kshetra is a sacred ground and a field of active power. The power of visiting the Tirtha or the Kshetra was for darshanam. And darshanam literally means looking with an intent of seeking knowledge. So researchers started saying that the concept of Tirtha and Kshetra gave birth to temples back then, which helped the human race to interconnect harmoniously with the universal cosmic power and to elevate us towards attaining moksha. And that's what our Vedas say in another beautiful sentence, very beautifully, Satyam Jnanam Anantam Brahma. So the primary reason behind setting up temple, I'm just re-emphasizing this thought, was to provide an ideal place for a human being to understand the divinity within, transcend all the barriers, and to elevate to the Satchidananda mode. So back then, temples were never built. They were never built to promote any specific religious cult. It was purely done for the benefit of mankind. So that is why Swami Vivekananda said, our temples are not churches. Our temples are not mosques. They are not places of public worship. For properly speaking, there is no such thing as public worship in India. So we now understood how the primary goal is. And now let's look at how the primary goal is achieved. So to achieve it, the temples had to aid the humans to inculcate the dharmic values and to constantly strive towards Ishvara Chaitanya. So this was done to dissolve the boundaries between the divine and the human. So the purity and the concentration was essential. And this was the atmosphere they were trying to provide in the temple. So we all know that the God is attributeless or infinite. That is what we call as nirguna. So the question came, how can a finite mind of a human understand this infinite? To solve this problem, the Saguna Brahman concept came. It implied that the God had a name, a form, and other attributes which we could relate to. And that is how the concept of Ishtadevata came. So this became the main force of the construction of the temple for the gods and the goddesses, so that the human beings could relate to one particular form of God. They could concentrate on the embodied form of God. And when we were constructing temples, the temples were always constructed where the earth's magnetic energy or the bioenergy is found to be very high. It was in a high energy field. And the Hindu temple always represents both the outer and the inner cosmos. The outer cosmos was expressed in terms of various astronomical connections, and the inner cosmos was in terms of our consciousness, the womb of a temple, the various structures that correspond inside the temple, which took cues from the structure of the human body. So that is why the Vedas said, Yada Pinde Tada Brahmande. So this basically means that whatever that goes within the human being is the same as that goes in the universe. So in the Garbhagriha of a temple, when the Murti was installed, special rituals were undertaken, and this Prana Pratishtha became the transmitter of the energy and the transcendent pure consciousness. So the energy that's coming from the idol or the Vigraham started to emanate towards the center of the Garbhagriha in all directions. So everything in the Garbhagriha was very symbolically designed. The location, the inner walls, the openings, the deities, the structure of the deities, the symbols, the rituals, and even the ceremonies to provide the manifestation of the divine and to make sure that there is a continuous presence of Chaitanya. So the ancient Hindus knew the benefits of this positive energy, both physically, mentally, and emotionally. And they used this one to elevate themselves to the next conscious level, slowly renouncing Maya and attaining moksha. So to create a temple as a perennial source of energy and not to dampen it with any negative, destructive, or pessimistic thoughts, a few rules and regulations were set in. So most of the temples started orienting towards the east, the auspicious direction of where the sun rises, to dispel darkness. The plan of the temple was strictly oriented to all the cardinal directions, and the attainment of the spiritual perfection in a temple was linked to the long journey with various stages. So it encouraged the reflection onto oneself, and it helped humans a sense of purification of the mind and to trigger the inner realization, and they could lift themselves to reach moksha. So that was a primary need of the temple. So the other question we normally encounter is, do we really need a temple? So unlike other religions, in Hinduism, it is not mandatory for a Hindu to regularly visit a temple. So the Hindu theists, the people who believe in Hinduism, can be broadly classified into two main categories. The first category, let's say people like us, right? Approximately 90% of the people will fall in this category, where we are like hamsters in a wheel. We are totally under the days of Maya. We keep running, and whenever we get some glimpses of the truth or the Atma Jnanam, we forget to hold them dear. We tend to lose them. We drop them in the mad rush to juggle other activities. We procrastinate, and in the end, we completely get entangled in the web of Maya, and we run and run like a hamster in a wheel. And the second category is the remaining 2% of the people. They are fully aware of the ever-existing and all-pervasive reality. They become silent upon realizing the ultimate truth. They connect with the source, and they are able to transcend all experiences, the boundaries, and they are able to cross Maya. So these are the fortunate souls, and for these fortunate souls, temples are not mandatory because they have already reached a higher plane. But for the regular people like us, the hamsters in the wheel, for sure it is. So we discussed the primary need of the temple, and now there's a few things on the secondary need of the temple. The secondary need of the temple came due to the influx of other cultures, customs, religions, and traditions. And Hindu temples in due course became a place of worship. It started becoming a place of self-reflection, healing center, social setting, meeting place, a sanctuary, a conservatory of arts and education as the years went by. So we can say a few examples there. Storing wealth was one of the common things which we did back in the olden temples, which came as a secondary need for the temple, because the temples were storehouses of enormous treasures. The kings and the chieftains back then accumulated wealth and they found it safe to keep the wealth inside the temple. They stored every bit of it, hoping that it will come in handy one day during flood, drought, famine, or war. Wealth accumulated in the temples were purely used for dharmic purposes because the Hindu Dharma back then was totally based on sharing and caring, and the rulers did act in a very ethical and moral manner. But in course of time, the brutal religious fanatics who came, who razed the temples because they realized they were reservoirs of wealth and they looted all the wealth. Then in some cases, the temples were acting as repositories. Because if you look at the oldest language of the world, Tamil clearly tells about lots of examples about tsunamis happening in the southern continent of India. And the temples in the Tamil Nadu had kalasham on top of the temple tower. And the temple tower is called Gopuram in Tamil. The temple Gopuram was the tallest structure in the world, in the town. And the metal kalasham on the temple Gopuram was acting as a good lightning conductor. So more than the lightning conductor function, it had another purpose as well. The kalasham inside the Gopuram, which is at a very high elevated end, stored 9 different types of grains, the Navadanyams. And they were all sealed airtight and fixed at the top of the Gopuram. So the olden Tamil text talks about tsunami, its destructive tendencies. And it says when the tsunami came, apart from the life and the property it took, most of the land and the crops were ruined, and the germinating seeds due to the influx of the sea water. So they went up to the temple Gopuram, they took the grains stored there, which did not have any salinity in it. So they brought the grains down and they started to recultivate and replenish the lost crops. So that was another function these kalashams had as well. And these people realized that when the grains were kept in a kalasham, the germinating potency did not last more than 12 years. So that is why every 12 years they started having a function called Kudamiragu, which was linked with Kumbhabhishekam, where they went inside the kumbhams, took all the old grains and they replenished with the new grains. Then the Hindu temples acted as secular spaces as well. And it became, when it started for the Bhakti Marga started coming in, it was become a hospitality ritual where the deity was honored, and a lot of people started coming into the temple as a puja and for bhajans and chanting. So the secondary need of the temple kept advancing that way. And similarly, it was a cultural center, especially when Hindus started migrating from India in 1800s, they wanted to hold on to the culture and tradition. So when they went outside India, they started developing temples where they could hold it as a cultural event. And the temples also acted as a psychological as well, because we believed in keeping our mind strong. And temple is one of those few places where one experiences peace. The tranquility, which is a natural state of divine vibrations that pervades the temple. So people were coming to temple for psychological reasons. And the other beauty of the temple was the activating the 5 senses. Because in Hinduism, it is clearly said that the positive energy in a temple, when you try to go inside a temple, can be absorbed optimally only when you bring all your 5 senses into control, or when all the 5 senses are activated in unison. The 5 senses being the sight, the hearing, the touch, the taste, and the smell. So that is why the bell, the temple bell, which is made up of a very special alloy of 5 metals, the lead, copper, zinc, iron, and tin, in a very specific ratio. So if you ever see a particular experienced professional buying the temple bell, you will always see the person using a tuning fork and a stop clock. Because a good bell produces a very distinct sound. It creates a harmony between the left and the right brain hemispheres, and it slowly calms the mind as the resonance drops. In a good bell, the sound vibration in an echo mode lasts 7 seconds. So that is the 7 seconds which a normal person who's been initiated into meditation needs to activate those 7 chakras or kundalini chakras in the body. So that is why when you see some experts buying bell, you always see them, they use a tuning fork to see the frequency, the resonance properties of the bell, and they also use the stop clock to see how much does the sound echo in a typical mode. So the moment that happens, one enters into a state of trance and becomes receptive to positive energy and thoughts. And similarly, we were refrained from wearing footwear. It's because most of the temple floors were made of granite, which are good conductors of positive vibrations, and we wanted to get or soak the energy through our feet. Then there was a lighting camphor in it. So in a South Indian temple, the inner core of the temple is usually very dark. Camphor, when it is lit, it activates our sight sense. So more than that, the camphor has got a lot of medicinal properties too. Camphor falls under the terpenes. It's a hydrocarbons with an oxygen functional group. And the hydrocarbons of the terpene type of hydrocarbons, they're excellent source where it prevents insects from growing as well. So they were using this widely inside the temple as a disinfectant too. Then you look at the tirtham that's being served at the temple, right? Where you keep it in a small copper pot, and the tirtham is given to you with the tulasis and all the stuff in it. So in Ayurveda, it tells that when a tirtham is stored in a copper pot for a few hours, it has got a lot of antioxidant properties, and it is good for your vata, pitta, and kapha. And the beauty about it is it's called oligodynamic effect. It kills the microbes and it gives you a normal intake of copper that a regular person needs every day and keeps your body pretty good state as well. Then you do the pradikshanam in a temple. The beautiful concept of pradikshanam is you're assuming the Lord is the center. He's the source and the essence of your lives. So recognizing the Lord as a focal point, we do pradikshanam. Pradikshanam in English is called circumambulation. So every point on the circumference of a circle is equidistant from the center. This basically means wherever or whoever we may be, we are always equally close to the Lord. His grace flows towards us partially and we energize ourselves. So looking back into the great 10 physics, if people can recollect it, there's something called the left-hand rule of Fleming. He talks about the induction law and the prediction of the direction of flux density. And when we look at the predictions which we make in a clockwise direction, we will realize that we have a lot in common here. So during my childhood days, my grandmother used to take me to the temple and will insist that I sit on the temple floor quietly for a few minutes after darshan, so that she can chant the mantra. And she used to chant, Anayasena maranam, vina dainena jivanam, dehi me kripaya shambho, tvahi bhaktim ajjanchalam. Anayasena maranam. Grant me an easy death without pain, death without throes. Vina dainena jivanam. Grant me a life where I'm not dependent on anyone, life without being pitied. Dehi me kripaya shambho, tvahi bhaktim achanchalam. O Lord, grant me an unwavering faith and devotion. Let me have you in my thoughts all the time. Whatever may be the desires of a person during this lifetime, there are only two goals: death without pain and suffering, and being not dependent on others, that one should really aspire for. Unfortunately, both these goals are not in our hands. Back then, when I was a toddler, I did not know the meaning of this beautiful mantra. When I do now, I realize how simple, sincere, earnest, fervent, and powerful my grandmother's prarthana was. So, to conclude, as we said, mind is the cause of bondage and liberation. When the functioning of the mind stops, mind dissolves into absolute, and we reach the stage of self-realization. This profound teaching, since the dawn of creation, was a hallmark of Hinduism. No other major religions in the world had it. It is the only way of expressing and indicating that the truth that is beyond the reach of mind and senses. It comforts the distressed humans. It infuses the inner spiritual strength. It gives us the courage and puts us back into the track on a resilient mode towards Atma Jnanam, towards moksha, the true essence of a religion. That is the primary need of a temple. Ancient Hindu thinkers used a very advanced approach for science. They termed science or the knowledge of science into two categories, Aparavidya and Paravidya. Aparavidya, or the worldly knowledge, is obtained through experiment, through analysis, through logical reasoning. It dealt with a changing, temporary, and eternal reality. As new researchers came in, the old researchers were pushed back. Whereas Paravidya, the knowledge, of the other hand, was a transcendental. It dealt with the changeless. It dealt with the eternal reality. It always reminded us what we are and where we are a part of. So, both these two categories of knowledge are important, both of them are complementary, and they're extremely useful. Our forefathers seamlessly blended both realms of knowledge to show the world the confluence of science and religion. And this synthesis, that is a confluence of science and religion, the uniqueness to Hinduism, this synthesis is showcased in all our temples. So this is a wonderful concept of the Hindu temples, which we seldom realize when we go there, and we get attracted to different other things. So let me end my talk with a beautiful quote from Puja Gurudev, Swami Chinmayananda. May your life be simple and pure, so you know only beauty. May your mind be clear and quiet, so you speak only of truth. May your heart be filled with love and compassion, so you radiate light to all you meet. May we all be blessed with divine grace. Om Tat Sat Hari Om. So there ends my presentation. I took around 49 minutes. So now I'm open to questions.
Thank you, Shaji, for the superb, superb performance. And I can tell you, hard work you have put up for preparing this has enabled us now to have a different outlook when we go to a temple. We are going for something different. You have done something great. One point I wanted to, I just